Hey, welcome to the CMO Whisper Show. I'm your host, Steve Olensky. Part marketing practitioner, part ad agency veteran, part journalist. I was a writer for Forbes for 10 years. I've had so many insightful conversations over the years with business leaders, to athletes, to celebrities, to, of course, CMOs. The only difference now is instead of sharing those insights through written form, I'm doing it this way. My guest this week is Jon Francis, the newly appointed Chief Experience Officer at State Farm Insurance. Now, Jon's career reads like a masterclass in how data, digital, and experience converge to drive transformation. At State Farm, he's going to be focused on building smarter, more human digital experience that serve both customers and agents, a mission that sits squarely at the intersection of technology and trust. Now, before joining State Farm, Jon spent 3 years at General Motors as Chief Data and Analytics Officer, leading enterprise-wide data strategy and innovation. Prior to that, he served as Chief Digital and Analytics Officer at Starbucks, where he and his team built a centralized engine for analytics, machine learning, and research, powering everything from personalized marketing to AI-driven real estate decisions. If that's not enough, Jon's career has also spanned leadership roles at Nike, Amazon, Expedia, and T-Mobile, making him one of the few executives who's helped shape digital strategy across nearly every major industry. I got to meet Jon at Advertising Week, which is going on about a month from the time we're recording this. And Jon was either smart or foolish enough to accept this invitation. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, no, Steve, thanks for having me. Excited to have the conversation with you today.
I am super pumped, my friend. Even the 30 seconds we had after your session at Ad Week alone was like, I can't wait to have this guy on. So I want to really get into some really good topics. And I want to start with the lost art of leadership. Now, we talk so much about technology, disruption, and innovation, but not enough about leadership itself. The kind of leadership that inspires, listens, and builds trust. First question is, what do you think has been lost in modern leadership? And a follow-up, how do we get it back?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I've thought a lot about this, and some of this is just through my own failures along the way. If I'm being vulnerable, but I think we've gone to a point where we equate leadership with knowledge and differentiated capabilities and skills. And as I've observed in my career, that's really not enough. It's not enough to just be super deep in a particular topic, and whether it's data, AI, or marketing. Usually what it's about is within the organizations that I've been in is, well, great, those, yes, those are a must-have, and those are the requirements. But true leadership comes in the form of, well, you can, you may be smart, be able to build some incredible capabilities, but then how do you drive the change management within an organization to wire those capabilities into the company? And usually that has nothing to do with how smart you are or how deep of experience you have in a particular topic. It's about how nuanced you are in terms of how you can win hearts and minds and bring people along. And it's not just the team that are reporting up to you, but also how you drive the right amount of influence to drive that transformation with the senior leaders above you, but also your peers.
Yeah.
And it's usually at the core of it, it comes down to building those really critical personal relationships with those individuals to create advocacy network to help you bring those capabilities to life. It's never enough. And unless, like, if you're working purely in a technology organization, I suppose it may be enough. But as you think about these heritage brands, certainly the ones that I've worked in, there's a lot about, from to, in terms of where an organization was, what they've held true and built their brand on, in some cases for over 50 to 100 years. Well, that doesn't just transform overnight if you're bringing in a different perspective or different capabilities. So for me, a lot of leadership has nothing to do with the technical or the knowledge base. It's about how you can bring others along, if that makes sense.
It does. And you used the word influence, and I want to kind of follow that up with Like, how do you define great leadership in an age where influence often gets mistaken for impact?
Yeah, well, I would argue that without influence, there is no
Mm.
impact. And so, the impact is realized through the influence of bringing others along, as I mentioned, and to be able to then execute and implement capabilities and have the right cross-functional alignment to actually bring those capabilities to life. And the impact for me is always, if you set up test and learn or experimentation to then take, whether it's some form of personalization, or you mentioned the real time, the machine learning driven real estate recommendations we were doing at Starbucks. Well, you set up tests to then prove, how once you've gotten past influence and you've brought others along and you're able to test those things in the wild and actually prove through experimentation or other form of measurement that, yeah, they do indeed are driving the impact that you want to see, whether it's about driving cost reduction, creating efficiency, or incremental revenue in some mechanism. And then now you've got a path to scale how you can bring those things to life.
You've been in a lot of places. You've had a lot of leaders yourself that you reported to, right? When you think back on some of those who shaped you, what are some qualities that stand out most?
Yeah, I love that question. And yeah, I've seen about every form and shape of leader, and the good and the bad and the ugly. And I think for me, maybe it's different for every person, but there are two words for me that are pretty critical when I think about a leader. Maybe three. One is empowerment, one is accountability, and the other is emotional
Mm.
intelligence. And I think when I think about empowerment, a lot of people talk about empowerment. Yeah, like I have a leader who empowers me, but it doesn't go far enough if that leader, and I think a lot about this for myself through my leadership, is empowerment's one thing, but if you're not being clear on the accountability and the expectations of what should be delivered and by when and how, then yeah, it's great to be empowered, but how are you ultimately ensuring that you're delivering against expectations and goals? So I always find that it's those leaders that both yes are going to empower, but also be really clear on accountability and expectations. And then I would also, as I said, add just emotional intelligence really goes a long way. And maybe in the dawn of this AI running everything in algorithms, we could sort of the emotional intelligence can get lost. But I think when it really comes to strong leaders, it's about meeting your team and people where they're at, understanding where they may be, maybe where they're having some challenges, where they may need some nudges, where they're getting a bit burned out, and you need to be leaning in to give them space
Yeah.
to kind of energize. So I actually find that one in particular for me, some of the worst leaders I've had, just to be direct, have been really light on the emotional intelligence, and it has led me into places where, well, you no longer want to work for an organization where
Yep.
you're just,
Yep.
commoditized and being pushed hard. And so I think there's, a real benefit and value to emotional intelligence, and it's a powerful way to separate yourself from other leaders because it does feel like that's getting to be more of a lost art these days.
I'm a big believer in you learn. It's important to learn what to do and also what not to do.
Yes, 100%.
And I want you to go back in time for me for a second again. But when you first started leading, is there something that you got, would say, completely wrong?
It's not just one thing. I don't think we have enough time here to cover that ground. But no, I think I think one of the things that and I'll think back to my Starbucks experience. When I first started to get into more senior leadership, and yeah, I think for me it came back to maybe not meeting people where they're at,
Mhm.
and and I was so convinced, and again, from an analytic and data science capability, some of the products, analytic products that we were building and solutions, I was so convinced, and it was so obvious to me, how to bring those to life and how they could help the organization. I'll give an example. We had built a customer lifetime value model, which not only is really powerful for marketing applications, but also how you can use that to inform product decisions, where you want to start to invest for instance, in digital, and starting to understand, hey, for every dollar you put into product X versus product Y, it can lead to a pretty significant yield, differentiated yield in the lifetime value. And so for me, it was always obvious. I think the mistake that I made, I'll use a dated movie reference here, but sort of a field of dreams that if you build it, they will
Mm.
come. I thought as I built a lot of capabilities, so obvious to me that, well, you put them out there, and then, of course, marketing teams and product teams and others will start to gravitate to leverage because, again, in my mind, it was always so clear. I think the part that I misjudged and, I've really focused on since is, and it comes back to the change management, is really being intentional and mindful about kind of walking a day in someone else's shoes and understanding their day to day and their workflow, and how they get things done, and making sure that as you're building capabilities, you do it in a way where, well, it's not, you're not throwing things over the fence, and that may seem super obvious, but it's more of a partnership and more of having the humility to understand that, well, maybe actually the thing they don't need right away is lifetime value, but it's actually something a bit more basic, and you could build towards the more advanced capabilities. But I think it does come back to then, really building strong listening capabilities, more empathy, and really trying to understand and meet people where they're at.
Yeah. And I think right along with that is humility, right?
Yes.
And leading. Look, we're in the age of algorithms. I mean, let's not kid each other, and that's not going anywhere, right? So
Yep.
humility can very easily, and humanity for that matter, can be put on the back burner. So how do you,
Totally.
John Francis, how do you personally balance confidence in data-driven decisions with the humility to question what the data might be missing in the first place?
Yeah, that's just a really good question, and it'd be easy to say data and algorithms, uber alles, but the reality is, I've really tried to take more of a long game perspective, and sometimes, and some of these brands that, like, take Nike or Starbucks as an example, these are incredible brands in the almost in the absence of data and the gut-based decisions that were made from the early days, respectively, of each brand that are 50 plus years old now. That, yeah, based on gut instinct alone, they built something super incredible, multi-billion-dollar, beloved, customer-obsessed organizations. And so it's not as simple. I think one is, and coming back to the word we use, humility, to say, for me as a data professional, it'd be very easy to come in and say, well, you're not thinking about this right. This data is telling us something quite obvious, versus me coming in and having the humility to honor and respect what these brands have done almost in the absence of data. And then how can you, emote that, if you will, just in terms of how you present or represent the data and honoring the work that's been done that, may be more gut-based decisioning, but lensing your work through that in a way that can be really resonant to help those organizations see that, well, this is an individual who truly respects what we've done as a brand, and it's not dismissive just to say, this data is going to tell us something completely different, but rather it's additive, it's an and, not an or. And I find personally, just from a communications perspective, that's really critical.
Hmm.
And again, I think it comes back to the word that you use, to have the humility and the respect to understand, how this organization got to the place it is. And you want to honor and respect that, but you also want to be able to find then a pathway to say, well, how do we then leverage data to augment and put this thing
Yeah.
on steroids and really drive to the next 50 years for that
So
organization.
how should audience signals, for example, inform creative and message and format and offer without like over personalized or creeping people out?
Yeah, great question. I think again it comes back to, it's a bit of head and heart in the sense that, where you can get the greatest efficiencies. And if you took audience signals as an example, well, what you don't want to have happen is a human being, a marketer, having to over rev to think through, well, here's a particular campaign. We're trying to sell this drink or this pair of sneakers or this car. And I'm gonna have to think through how best to target, like who should I include in that campaign. This is a role like no human being, from a can process the dimensionality of data that a computer can do, an algorithm can do, to best inform how you can best target for that campaign. But where I think an algorithm will gap against a human, a marketer who understands sort of the heart of the brand and the DNA of the brand is to then say, how best do we want to communicate with that customer? And what's the creative that we think can be most resonant for the consumer? And yeah, sure, AI can absolutely help allow you to get scale and to create some level of personalization to some degree, but AI will never be able to really get to that DNA and what the core is. And the AI can train on that, that insight from a marketer. But really, I think as you think about the creative aspect, that's where I think more of the heart should come in, and just in terms of how you think about
Yeah.
really communicating with those consumers that the algorithms can really help identify and target.
Since you brought it up, and this might be the longest I've gone in an interview without bringing up those two letters, but you brought up AI.
Yeah.
What's your philosophy on AI and marketing, like content acceleration, media optimization, analytics? Just kind of pull back the curtain for us on your philosophy on AI and marketing.
Yeah, look, I think maybe those things have always existed back to the database marketing days, and and before it became part of the common vernacular and the headlines. Building machine learning or targeting algorithms to identify the best customers to target for campaigns, or how you use insights from analytics to inform an optimization, or how you do automated bidding, through more innovative analytic tactics. Those things have always existed. So I think for me, the thing that feels different now is the scale through which you can now start to get, and the bar has been lowered in terms of how are we able to leverage those capabilities now through AI and generative capabilities, that you didn't need to have an army of data scientists anymore. So there's a real level of efficiency that's being created through these capabilities that allows marketers to continue to scale and leverage those capabilities to just get really smart and more efficient in terms of how you squeeze as much incremental value out of those dollars, those media dollars, or
Right.
overall marketing dollars. And then on the creative side, yeah, I think the thing that, again, I'll be consistent in that I do think there's still a super important role for marketers who sort of live and breathe the heart side, the DNA, a brand and a company. But I do think where I found that, as as someone who's done a lot of personalization in the past, that the long pole was always creative. And how do you make, like, if you really want to truly get to one marketing, that the creative part of that was always the long pole in terms of getting the variance that you needed to really scale, to do personalization that is truly contextually relevant for every individual. Well, yeah, now I do think that we're in a phase where we now have those capabilities, and
Right.
I think it's still, there's some maturation that still needs to happen. I think I've seen plenty of creative that's been generated from AI that, well, why does that customer have six fingers on one hand? I mean, we're not
Yeah.
entirely out of that yet, but we will be soon. And so, but all that to say, I think, given the size of device, like most customers are staring at advertising on a pretty small device, your phone. And so I think there's a place in time where you can use a lot of that AI generated content in a way that's appropriate
Yeah.
for the channels that people are consuming. And then maybe, for your linear TV, it's probably an entirely different story, and you
Right.
want to have different level of creative, but that's where you should be deploying, your better, higher quality creative that, your agencies or otherwise might be producing.
I want to just do a slight pivot for a second here. You've been at so many of these huge brands, and I want to get your thoughts on partnerships, right, with other brands. And because I get asked this a lot, and because I deal with, we talk to so many CMOs, and from your lens, how do you ensure partnerships add brand equity and performance lift, not just slapping two logos next to each other?
Yeah. Well, and again, I think I think for me, it's and you may recall this from the panel I was on, but it's always, the proof is always sort of in the pudding in
Yep.
terms of what do you, okay, well, how do you measure, being very intentional about when you're going on a path to understand a particular partnership, how do you have and establish the right measurement criteria? What are those KPIs that you'll use to determine whether there's efficacy in that partnership? And then how do you measure it? And it could be, hopefully all boats float up for both brands, and there needs to be some mutual benefit. In other cases, it can be that can be executed through brand equity studies or otherwise. In other cases, it might be more driven by more empirical results. And for instance, when I was at Starbucks, like whether it was, airlines that we were partnering with, where we had shared currency on our loyalty points, but being able to then tap in and run campaigns leveraging both
Yeah.
customer files, where you can actually start to prove that, yeah, so one plus one equals three or whatever it is, but that there's benefit for unlocking your customer file for a partner, that they are now starting to create more market share for themselves, or they're able to generate more revenue in some meaningful way. So I do think that, I try to be really disciplined around, sort of the proof is in the pudding, just in terms of being really clear on the measurement and how you're going to do the
Yeah.
measurement to get to that efficacy.
Pardon my diversion there, because
No, it's
it
good.
just popped in my head going, I got to ask John, because you're so
Yeah.
have all this experience, and again, people want to know, how do you measure the efficacy of a brand partnership? So thank you for that.
Right.
I want to go
Yeah.
back to AI and specifically change management, right? And we all know, look, technology moves fast, not exactly breaking news, but people don't always keep up, right?
Yeah.
So my first question is, what are the biggest mistakes you've seen organizations make when trying to implement like technology or AI? And then how, as a follow up or even a subset of that, is the hyperbole of so much AI stuff now. Like, how do you,
Yeah.
how does one go, this is real, this is fake? Literally.
Yeah. It's such a great question. Maybe start unpacking the hype part of it first. I think one big mistake a lot of organizations are making right now, and chasing the hype. And you hear a lot about companies saying, "Well, we need an AI strategy." And for me, the joke I make a lot is, well, it's like saying we needed a Microsoft Excel strategy. Well, no one, of course, would say that. Like,
Right.
Microsoft Excel is an enabler for you to do work. And guess what? We may not, the headlines may say otherwise, but AI is really just a very powerful enabler. So I think for me, when I see companies doing it right versus when they're not doing it right, is you first start with, well, hold on, time out. Like, what are we trying to solve as an organization? What are the biggest challenges for the company? It's whether, how can we drive more incremental revenue? How do we create more efficiencies or mitigate costs in a meaningful way? Start with the business problem, what it is that you're actually trying to get done, and then figure out what are the tools to bring to bear to help solve those problems. And as I said, like, AI is an amazing enabler, but I never would want to start first and foremost with, like, hey, here's this shiny object, let's then figure out what we're going to go apply it to. I think you have to be really clear eyed and clear minded on what's your corporate strategy, what are the biggest challenges for the organization, and then start there before, otherwise you have kind of a tail wagging dog problem.
Yeah.
The other mistake that I see a lot, and I'd be interested, I'm sure there's McKinsey or Bain studies on this, is what percentage of companies can't get beyond pilot phase.
Mm,
And you see, a large percentage of companies, and I've seen enough studies at this point, they're kind of stuck at that POC. A couple things on that, maybe the medicine there is, one, don't pilot something that you don't see a technical path to get to fully bright and scale.
yeah.
Because then otherwise, frankly, it's just a shiny object. Like, anyone can MacGyver and scrap together a small pilot. But if you don't see a path to production from a technical perspective, then you're just kind of wasting everyone's time. The second part of that, and I do think it comes back to change management, is if, again, a lot of those pilots fail because someone went off in a room and built something and did the surprise and delight, and said, hey, look at what the shiny thing that I built. But you didn't bring other people along on the journey and in terms of how they could co-own this capability that you're building. And, most of the organizations I've worked in, having to work across a lot of different functions to get the right alignment. And so I think having more of a collaborative approach to how you build those pilots and also how you think about ultimately you would scale the pilot is going to really help you move beyond just that initial kind of shiny object phase and actually start to really extract value from your AI applications.
Talking about like, what have you learned when it, because people look, we all know the saying of people are always reluctant to change, right? But what have you learned about helping people adapt to change, but not just process it, but really embrace it?
Yeah, I mean it's got to be about co-ownership, and and for me the best this works the best. It's when if you're starting on a particular initiative that's going to require some significant change or different technology or it's AI, starting from scratch to almost build a cross-functional pod. And it's not just the people building the capability. You can't just be having stakeholder throw requirements over the fence. You have to have almost an embedded pod of all the relevant teams working together
Mm-hmm.
single-mindedly on this thing that you're trying to drive change and transformation over, because there's something kind of special about it that once you unlock that co-ownership or that co-authorship, then it's less about someone trying to get me to do something different. It's more about, well, we're kind of all in this together and this is our baby and we're going to bring it to life. So it seems like a really simple answer, and
Yeah.
I'm sorry for that, but
No.
it really does go a long way if you can get that co-ownership or authorship from the very beginning.
No, listen, I agree with you. There's so much more I want to get to. My gosh, I mean, we're going to do a part two. That's for damn sure. Maybe like 6 months after you're in, kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah.
But I got to ask you about trust and attention because it's a topic that really gets brought up a lot. In your opinion, what's a brand really do to earn attention today and trust, and what gives a brand a right to show up in someone's feed or inbox?
Great question. At first, I thought you were going to ask me about building trust internally in an
Mm,
organization, but I actually think this is a consistent, for both internal and
yep.
external. So you think about building trust broadly. I think a lot about leading with authenticity. And, I think where you see brands fail is where maybe they try to get on a hype cycle and, maybe coming back to this AI thing that they try to do things that may ultimately they feel like are going to create revenue or cost mitigation. But guess what? It may be a short term perspective, and because it may feel inauthentic to a consumer, like this doesn't feel like Starbucks. And we used to have these internal debates. I'll give an example that we never did, but we talked about, hey, for rewards members, wouldn't it be cool if we did facial recognition when someone walked in the
Mm,
store and you could automatically place an order based on the fact that you know that they're in the store. Well, sure, it creates efficiency. You're leveraging some really interesting technology, but that doesn't feel like, well, that doesn't feel like what Howard set out to do in terms of building a third place and this environment for customers almost go have an analog experience in terms of how they embrace Starbucks and enjoy it. And so I think it's making sure that you're constantly pressure testing, the ideas that you have and the capabilities that will get in front of a
yeah.
customer. Well, is it really authentic to your brand identity and who you are, what made you who you are, and being really honest with yourself, because things that may help like cut costs or generate revenue in the short term, actually, if going back to lifetime value, they may erode trust over the long run.
Yeah.
And so you can't, you have to balance the short term things against the long term brand efficacy.
Exactly. All right, my friend, we're coming up against it here, and I got to finish with what I always do, the random five. Five personal questions so the audience can get to know you a little bit better. If you're ready,
Okay.
I'm going to put you on the spot with the first one. If someone made a movie about your life, what would the title be and who would play you?
Well, I don't know if we probably wouldn't do very well at the box office for starters. So who would play me? Oh my gosh. I don't know. I'd love for Robert Downey Jr. to play me.
Okay.
And I don't know why, but you got me on the spot here.
Yep.
What would the title? What you said the title of the movie?
Of your life.
Uh, I don't know, man. I see ones and zeros.
That's it.
Let's just
I was,
call it
I was
that.
going to say, I thought that was it. I don't know, man. That could be.
Well, okay, let's go with I don't know, man. Yeah, that's it. I love it.
All right, next question. You've got an entire free day with no responsibilities. What does that day look like? What are you doing?
Entire free day with no
No work
responsibilities.
nothing. What are you doing?
Yeah, I get a really good workout in the morning,
Mm.
get my heart rate jacked. I sit down with a coffee, and I've got New York Times either digitally or physically, and I'm going to read that thing head to tail. And yeah, and if nothing else happens in that day, I'm okay with it.
Yep.
I'll celebrate that time right there.
What's the first concert you ever went to?
Rolling Stones, Steel Wheels. I think it was maybe 1990.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you remember how it made you feel?
Well, I thought those guys were old back then.
30 years later.
So,
They're still-
yeah, 30 years later, they're still going. God bless them.
All right, next question. If you could instantly master a new skill or talent, what would it be?
Skill or talent. You know, I'm horrible with my hands, and so I would love to either be really good at fixing cars
Mhm.
or woodworking. Anything with my hands, I've never had any orientation towards that. So that'd be great.
My hand is raised. I am in the same boat. So when you learn it, pass it on to me, please.
I will. Yeah, I will.
Okay. Last question. Is there a book, a saying, a quote that really has more meaning for you than others?
Well, you know, you're catching me off guard here, and if I thought a bit more about it, I might give you a different one. But a quote, this one always stuck to me from Nike, and they talk a lot about edit to amplify.
Mm.
And it's really, how do you say more with less? And the power in being really brief and how you express your thoughts. And there's a bit in there too about just being really good active listener.
I love it. Well, Jon Francis, my new friend, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, and I wish you all the best in your new role.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I appreciate you having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Well, that wraps up another episode of the CMO Whisperer Show. I hope you shared this episode with your friends, and if you have not already, please subscribe to be kept up to date on all the latest episodes. And if you're so inclined, leave me a review on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you.